Jacques Audiard, who's a French filmmaker, and I really like
Mhm.
him. He did this movie called A Prophet from like 2010,
Oh,
which is
yes, I remember that
A
film.
French
Yeah,
prison movie, which is
yeah,
amazing. It's like
yeah.
a wonderful sort of crime epic. So I was like, and I've interviewed him before actually, not to brag too much, and he's a fascinating guy.
You're wonderful to see. You ought to be in pictures all what a
James, I can't believe we're at the end of, not at the end of, we're at the beginning of 2025. We're getting this out a little late, but I think this is the
True.
fourth best of that we've done because we did 2022, 2023. Let's get right into it. I'll start with number 10.
Okay.
And this is where we go from best to my favorite, a movie that impacted me. My number 10 is The Way, My Way. It's a new film done by filmmaker Bill Bennett on the Camino de Santiago. And you know, I'm a big Camino de Santiago pilgrim. I've walked it twice, and I found this movie very enjoyable. I don't think it's the best Camino film ever, and this is why it's number 10 on my list here. But I
Mm.
wanted to include it in my top 10 because anything Camino related is instantly going to have a warm place in my heart. And
That's it.
essentially, it's the
Sorry.
true story of a filmmaker, Bill Bennett, who walked the Camino a few years ago. And so basically, he's done a film of his memoir. And so he has real actors, but real pilgrims playing I think only three or four of the speaking roles are professional actors. Everyone else is a pilgrim. And it even features a very famous pilgrim that a lot of us that are familiar with the Camino de Santiago, Johnny Walker Santiago. Johnny Walker is a famous pilgrim and a lot of, he interacts with a lot of people online to talk about the Camino. So it's great to see him in the film. Again, it's a pilgrimage. I loved it. It probably won't make anybody else's top 10, but it made mine.
Excellent. Yeah, no, I haven't heard of that one. If I'm completely honest, I hadn't even heard of the Camino as a pilgrimage route until you started doing it
Mhm.
and talking about it. And you showed me that one, the one with Martin Sheen in it, The Way.
Yes. Yeah.
But that's the only Santiago Camino Santiago
Yeah.
movie I'm aware of. No, so I don't know. I didn't even know this was a movie, but that's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, my number 10 is a movie that I think you will be aware of, and it's Dune Part 2.
It
So
made your top 10 barely.
barely. Okay, so I mean, for a lot of people, I mean, Dune Part One was my number one film of 2021. I thought it was fantastic. I thought it really captured the scope and the scale and the world building of that franchise incredibly well. This second film, I was quite surprised that some people seemed to think that this one was even better than the first one. For me, the structure felt a little bit less clear. It was busier. Obviously, it had a lot more action in it, a lot more characters, a lot more plot going on. But I think that in a way that sort of lessened the impact of the whole endeavor. Other people liked it for exactly that reason. They felt that the first one was too slow. There wasn't enough going on. But what I was very grateful to see is that it retained the same sense of world building. It seemed to operate on the same scale as the first one, and although it felt sort of far more chaotic, it feels very much like the middle chapter of a
Yeah.
trilogy. And often those sort of don't really work for me because they don't have the intro and they don't have the closure. It's just like, here's all the stuff in the middle. But it was still, it was still great to revisit those characters and revisit that world. So I didn't want to ignore it completely. And obviously on a technical level, it's fantastic, and it really is.
Right.
I'm just happy that kind of sort of intelligent science fiction filmmaking is being made at that level of
Yeah.
artistry and on that scale, and so it was great. So yeah, it didn't hit me quite as emotionally as the first part did, but it's still pretty cool.
For me, it's just too much of a love story, distracted from for me, the important parts. But you can find all of that in our review of the film.
We did. We went long. I think didn't we even do like two videos on it or something? Maybe I
I
can't
think we
remember.
did. Yeah. Yeah. So my number 9 is a documentary, and it is Superman, the Christopher Reeve story. And I thought it's just a brilliant documentary on the life of tragic death of Christopher Reeve and the accident. Obviously, I think everybody listening will be quite familiar with it. But the documentary really goes behind the scenes. About half of it is pre the fall, and half of it is post, and they kind of intermingle back and forth in a way that really highlights what a genuinely good soul Christopher Reeve was, which makes the tragedy all the more tragic. And I never understood, or I never realized the real intimate relationship he had with Robin Williams, and how Robin Williams helped him along through the whole thing. And it's in his first wife, and then his second wife, and the kids come along, and it is a heartwarming documentary, which I highly recommend if you haven't seen it.
Yeah, I have seen it. I did like it quite a bit. I think, if I'm completely honest, what happened with me is I was watching a lot of documentaries around the same time, and a lot of those documentaries were these sort of celebratory, biographical documentaries about sort of celebrities. And there were just a lot, seemed to be a lot of those this year. And with that degree of cooperation and oversight from the family, I'm always a little bit sort of cynical and a little bit sort of disappointed that it doesn't really go as deep and dark as I want it to. But sometimes that's just because they weren't that bad. It's really good. I really liked the blending of a lot of archival footage and interviews with his whole family and his children and all the rest of it. It is really good. It is really powerful and really moving. And he was kind of like this, tragic figure. The irony that the whole story is steeped in is impossible to ignore. It's a really good movie. Okay, my number 9 is Alex Garland's Civil War. Now, this was a movie that came out right at the beginning of the year and immediately went to like my number 1 spot. And when that happens, I'm always like, okay, I'm not even sure if that's going to hang on until the end of the year, but it did. I didn't revisit it either, but it was really kind of powerful, and I really appreciated how it stripped all the politics out of it, because it put you in the mindset of the photojournalists who have to be detached, they're there to document the conflict, not take sides, not to build a narrative of heroes and villains or anything like that, but just say, this is what is happening. And I think by stripping away the politics of it to the point where, you can see it's a kind of fascist uprising, but by having certain states form allegiances that wouldn't normally form, like Texas and California form one side of it, and what have you. It deliberately wrongfoots you in a way that it's not immediately obvious who are the Republicans, who are the Democrats even. He also draws from his legacy of sort of zombie movies. He wrote 28 Days Later and things like that. So as you're driving through middle America with these characters, it feels like a kind of post-apocalyptic wasteland, and I think it really sort of puts you in the mind of it. And then, as one would hope from a movie about photographers whose job it is to sort of sensationalize or encapsulate this entire experience in a single image, it looks fantastic throughout, and some of the needle drops in it were just incredibly effective. And so you can say, it's superficial and it doesn't dig deep enough, but it's like, but that's kind of the point. I mean, this is sort of tabloid journalism. You have to say it all in a single image, and it is sensationalizing it. That's exactly what it's examining. And I just thought it was incredibly powerful. And I think that the people who criticized it for not taking a side are missing the point entirely.
Yeah, this film nearly made my top 10, and this speaks to the subjectivity of these lists, in that I saw Civil War a while back, and if I'd seen it more recently, it very well might have made my top 10. But I love a film that celebrates journalism. I thought it did a great job doing that. I don't think enough films have captured real journalism, and I thought this film does a pretty good job, especially with journalism being under attack so much. And as we're seeing more and more authoritarianism rising in the world, a journalist is going to be an endangered species. And so I'm glad it made your top 10, because it was close to making mine. My number 8 is Amila Perez. This film, I wasn't sure it was going to make if you told me, hey, Steve, there's this film, it's about a Mexican drug cartel leader who wants to transition to being a woman, kidnaps a lawyer, gives her the mission to go around the world and find somebody who's going to do this, take care of her family, and then after he becomes a woman, becomes an advocate for all the Mexican drug cartel missing people. I would have just flipped out. And then if you told me, oh yeah, and they break into song and dance occasionally because it's a musical, I'd gone, WTF? What are you talking about? And granted, this movie is a 2-hour soap opera. Like they cram every trope or every, just craziness. I mean, the premise defies credibility, and yet somehow it worked for me. I enjoyed it. I enjoy this film. I love the performances, but I don't know the main character actor's name, but Zoe Saldana does a fantastic job. I love that it was all in Spanish. It forced me to really have to pay attention to the whole thing. And so, and also I think I just recently watched it and it impacted me so much. I thought, this could be in my top 10. It's not going to be near number one, but we'll throw it in there. And so, yeah, Emilio Perez.
Interesting. Yeah, I saw this one at Busan at the film festival back in October. It had won the Best Actress prize for the entire female cast at Cannes. Yeah. And so it was one that I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that's supposed to be good. And it's Jacques Audiard, who's a French filmmaker, and I really like him. He did this movie called A Prophet from like 2010, which is
yes, I remember that film.
A French prison movie, which is amazing. It's like a wonderful sort of crime epic. So I was like, and I've interviewed him before, actually, not to brag too much, and he's a fascinating guy. So it was on my radar, but I didn't know anything about it. All I knew is that all the actresses had won collectively at Cannes, and that was sort of unprecedented or what have you. And I remember going, I think I heard this was a musical, but beyond that, I really didn't know anything about it whatsoever, which I think was the best way to go in, because so much has been made of the fact that it tackles sort of issues to do with transgenderism and does so in a manner that might be considered crass, particularly out of context. There were immediately viral clips of certain songs or snippets from certain songs. There's one song in particular where she's going around talking to surgeons. And the surgeons are singing about the surgery, and people were taking that out of context and going, "What the hell is this? And it's like, well, this is what happens when you take things out of context and you try and blow them up on the internet to serve your own agenda. And also, it's had criticism for not adequately respecting the Mexican people. It's like, that's bullshit too.
I wouldn't have said that. Yeah.
It's like you've painted all of Mexico as drug cartels. It's like, no, they haven't. This is just a story about a Mexican drug cartel. That doesn't mean that everybody is. So it was kind of crazy seeing it all unfold in front of me, and I was like, wow, I had no idea that it was about any of this. I was immediately blown away by Zoe Saldana's performance. I'm kind of surprised that the way she's been put forward in awards categories is as best supporting. Because although Carla Sofia Gascon's character is, the story is about her, she's not the central character, or rather, she's not the protagonist. Yeah, Saldana's character is the one who is our entry point, and it's her journey facilitating this character. Yeah, that's really
it's her story we're following mainly.
Yes, I mean, nevertheless, I'm very happy to see that she's getting sort of awards attention for it, and I've never seen Zoe Saldana do something like this. She tends to be obviously in massive sci-fi action movies like Avatar and Guardians of the Galaxy and things like that. But it has the tone of, you said, soap opera. It's like a sort of a Mexican telenovela, almost. Yeah. It's so heightened. It's so melodramatic. But that's what they're going for. And I think that's just a little too flamboyant for some. It's a little too unsubtle for some. It's a little too big for some. The flip side of that is, I think that people have sort of blown the film up a little bit too much and I feel it's because they're like, I'm going to vote for this because it represents a positive role for a transgender issues and performers to a degree that I don't think the film can quite carry. And I think that we've seen it kind of overachieve at award ceremonies because of that. But that's not to take away from the film. That's other people projecting onto the film and using the film as a tool for their own agendas. I think the film is crazy. I'll always respect a big swing.
Yeah. That's the term we like to use, and I would apply it to this film. A couple things I want to highlight that, and you mentioned. First thing that you didn't mention was I was drawn to the fact I was comparing it in some ways to Brokeback Mountain, and that each one tackles an issue of sexual orientation or sexuality with a really non-traditional character. Brokeback Mountain, you have gay cowboys. There's nothing more masculine than a cowboy. I mean, especially 20, 30 years ago, we associated, gay males with very, light on their feet, more feminine type characters. Here you have really masculine cowboys who are gay. It really broke a stereotype. And now with the transgendered, your typical understanding of a transgender person or somebody who transitions is somebody who's already kind of acting a little female and then they become female. Whereas there's nothing more sinister and masculine than a Mexican drug cartel leader, and yet it just breaks that mold, that stereotype. So I found some similarities there in how they use these very hyper masculine starting points to address the issue of sexual orientation. The second thing was, I thought the same thing is, are you allowed to not like this film because of the nature of it? Like, can we just review it on its merits and merits alone? And I'm trying to see it through that lens. And when I did it, I realized, it's number 8 on my list. It's not the best film of the year. It has its shortcomings. But like you said, I like The Big Swing. Hey, it's a movie about a drug cartel leader who becomes a woman, becomes an advocate for missing children, the very thing that he was responsible for creating. And then he inevitably falls in, because these things have a way of always catching up with you. Not unlike The Godfather. As much as you try to, every time they, I think I'm out, they pull me back in. Every time she's trying to get out, but her history pulls her back in, and she ultimately has her demise. So, it's number 8 on my list. It's not the best film of 2024, but it makes my top 10.
Excellent. I'm glad we got to talk about it. Okay, my number 8. Where are we? Okay, my number 8 is Jesse Eisenberg's A Real Pain.
It's my number 7. It's my number 7.
Perfect.
So we can
great.
I was just double checking where I had it on my list.
I was just making sure. Because I had a feeling that you liked it too. This was a film I didn't really know anything about. Again, it's something I saw at Busan. And I knew that Jesse Eisenberg had written it and directed it, and he was in it with Kieran Culkin, and I didn't really know what it was about. And this is a movie that kind of really spoke to me. I mean, I am not Jewish. I do not have estranged cousins that I reconnected with, and I haven't traveled overseas to try and retrace the roots of my family or anything like that, which is the plot of the movie. But that central relationship really spoke to me. I saw a lot of myself in the Kieran Culkin character, but then also in some of the Jesse Eisenberg character, some of the friendships I have, I saw have that kind of dynamic to them. And I just thought it was played so realistically. It felt so natural, so unforced, so free, and just effortlessly funny and touching and heart-wrenching in all the right places. I mean, Kieran Culkin is obviously on a bit of a roll these days with Succession and what have you, but he gets it. He's so sort of attuned to that type of person, that type of social interaction, that sort of, it's not rude, but it's also just an unwillingness to toe the line when it comes to certain social barriers, social what do I mean? What's the word I'm looking for? Rituals, in terms of how you're supposed to interact with people, particularly people you've just met, people you don't know very well.
Conventions, social conventions.
Conventions, that's the word. Thank you. He just throws all that to one side, and he's like, "It's irrelevant. Let's cut to the chase. This is what I want to talk to you about, and this is how I'm going to act." And I just came out just kind of going, "Wow, that's a really brilliant character piece, and it was really funny, and it was really moving, and it stuck with me, and respect where it's due, really."
Actually, it's my number 7, and I have very little to add because I just mirror everything you just said, so I'm not going to repeat it. Another point that I did like, though, is, and I don't like to bring politics into it, but I love that it really focused in again on the Holocaust to a degree. And I think a new generation needs to be reminded of what happened 80 some years ago, because I think a younger generation is starting to forget, particularly with what's happening in Gaza and Israel. And I don't want to get into that per se, but leaving that aside, we can never forget what occurred. And this affects not just the Jewish people, this is humanity. And I love how Jesse Eisenberg is able to weave in some real moral lessons, some lessons we as humanity need to remember. Like, do not forget this. Also, we're going to have a really great story about 2 cousins doing this road trip together. And so it was a sweet spot for me. I love this film. It makes my top 10.
Excellent. Okay, well then my number 7. I'm pretty confident that this isn't on your list. It's far and away the most obscure film on my list, but it's a film I saw back in April, and this is a Kazakhstani thriller called Steppenwolf by a filmmaker called Adilkhan Yerzanov, who has been on my radar for a few years now, largely thanks to the Hong Kong International Film Festival keeps programming his movies and getting me to write them up for them year on year on year. So I've seen like his last half a dozen movies, and he's just great. He sets all his films in kind of contemporary Kazakhstan, which he represents as this kind of like bombed out post-apocalyptic wilderness. But then his films are shot through with this incredibly sort of deadpan sense of humor that's almost like a Wes Anderson movie. You know, all the characters have like very sort of minimal expressions, but then will lash out violently or do really absurd things, and you're like, okay, this guy has seen a lot of Wes Anderson or a lot of Roy Anderson, who's a Scandinavian filmmaker who does stuff in exactly kind of the same way. So although his films are all kind of uniquely Kazakhstani in their setting and in their mood, they draw from Hollywood influences, and this movie is kind of The Searchers, as though made in the style of Drive, the Ryan Gosling movie.
Yeah.
So it's set in this world, and it's on the brink of a kind of civil war. There are lots of uprisings going on, and a young woman loses her child, and she doesn't know if he's got wandered off or he's been kidnapped or whatever, and she needs somebody. She's incredibly sort of frail and unable to she doesn't have the agency really to go out and do it herself, and so she can't find anybody to help her, and so she turns to the only guy willing to help, who is this absolute beast, thuggish guy who the police use as a torturer and interrogator. He's just the nastiest piece of work ever, and he agrees, and you realize very quickly that he thinks he knows who has kidnapped the kid and has ulterior motives for finding those people. So he's like, yeah, okay, I'll come along. But there is no love lost between this couple whatsoever. I mean, he has no time for her. She is this very sort of mousy, very quietly spoken, very sort of frail young woman. And he treats her absolutely terribly. He's the worst piece of work in the world. But they embark on this sort of unlikely road trip together that is incredibly stylish, incredibly surprising and confrontational. But there is dark humor in it along the way, and I just came out of it. I saw it at another festival. I went to Brussels to the film festival there, and it won the main prize. So the jury picked it as the favourite film. So on the last day, they showed all the winners. So I just spent the day catching up with all the winners, and so I saw it, and I was just like, wow, this movie is just incredible, just stylish, just confrontational, just the performances are great. And I'm surprised it doesn't seem to have picked up much distribution, so it hasn't been in like the awards conversation at all, even as like a foreign film selection or something like that. So hopefully people will get to see it. I've just seen that his new movie is headed to Berlin next month, so he's around and he's very much sort of in the conversation. And I will champion his work because he's still quite young as well. I think he's still in his 30s and he's already made like 12 movies or something.
Oh wow!
So this is called Steppenwolf. If you get the chance to see it, do so. It's quite something.
Well, you've piqued my interest. You've piqued my interest. My number 6, James, I think is on your list. So we'll see if we're going to do it now or later. But it is The Substance.
It's on my list. It's a little bit higher. So,
Okay.
So we'll talk about it in a little bit.
Yep.
My number 6, I think, is on your list as well. So let's see where it is. My number 6 is The Seed of the Sacred Fig.
Ah, yes. Mine's a little bit higher.
All right.
So-
Back to you.
Okay, so we'll go with my number 5, which is, I just recently saw it, The Brutalist.
Mine's a little bit higher.
Higher, okay. So you're number 5.
Okay, so my number 5, also recent. I'm not sure if this might have been one of the few that you haven't seen yet, unfortunately. This is Nosferatu.
Yeah, I've been trying to see it, haven't been able to see it. It may very well have made my top 10. Although I've heard mixed reviews on this, but it's made your top 10. I'm looking forward to hearing why.
Okay, this is a remake of the 1922 silent movie Nosferatu, which was a sort of legally different adaptation of Dracula. It's essentially the Dracula story, but then the Bram Stoker family, the estate, tried to sue Murnau and the people making that film, and so they tweaked it. They moved it from England to Germany. They changed all the character names, and they changed like as little as they needed to in order to make it different. So you will see a lot of similarities between the story and Dracula, but also a few sort of notable and subtle differences. It's essentially, yes, the same thing. Count Orlok out somewhere in sort of Transylvania wants to lease some property in small town in Germany, and so a young estate agent is sent out there to sign the contracts, played by Nicholas Hoult, and he discovers that this guy is a vampire. But not only that, but the vampire is drawn to this young man's fiancée back at home, here played by Lily Rose Depp, and that they have some kind of cosmic connection that will bring them together and cause all kinds of chaos in the process. This is the new film from Robert Eggers. He's a filmmaker that's been on my radar since he started, really. He made The Witch, which kind of launched the career of Anya Taylor-Joy. Yeah. Then he made The Lighthouse with Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe, which is a big favorite of mine. I love that movie. And then he did The Northman, the Viking movie with Alexander Skarsgård, which was his first attempt at kind of like a studio movie, and I think he had a pretty bad experience doing that, but it's a cool movie nonetheless. So this, in many ways, I found was kind of like the perfect project for him. Apparently, he's been trying to make a movie since he was a child. He was putting on like stage productions of this at school. And it really does just play into all of his strengths, really. From the production design, he's this fastidious attention to detail, the sort of gothic atmosphere of it all, the incredibly lurid visuals. It's violent, it's sexy, it's erotic, it's all of these things. It's moody, but it also has a sort of a little bit of a kind of sense of humor to it. I think in many ways it's closest to Bram Stoker's Dracula, the Francis Ford Coppola version in some ways. It's got that kind of sense of scale and grand guignol kind of sort of celebration of the grosque. And for me, I was just like, yep, this is everything I hoped it would be. Nice. It was an absolute thrill. I frustratingly, I didn't get to see it, or haven't yet got to see it on the big screen. I know it's coming to Hong Kong in February, so I will definitely go see it again when I can.
Excellent. So I think we're up to number 4 now. And my number 4 is Furiosa, a Mad Max saga. I'm a big Mad Max fan, and I thought initially when I heard they were going to focus on Anna Taylor-Joy playing the Furiosa character, made famous in Fury Road by Charlize Theron, I was like, no, you're not going to focus on Max. You're going to focus on Furiosa. You're going to call it a Mad Max film. It's not even going to be Charlize Theron. It's like, and maybe that's why it figures so high in my movie list is my expectations were really low. And when I went to see it, I was just blown away. I loved it. I loved it. Had a lot of a lot of the elements I loved in Fury Road, the action with even more storytelling. There was more story development in this. Unfortunately, the film failed to really ignite viewers in the same way that Fury Road did. And Fury Road recently, I put it in my top 10 of all time. Whether it stays there, I don't know. But I so love Fury Road. It's probably one of the reasons that when Furiosa,
Yeah.
when it really exceeded my expectations and quite noticeably, it's kind of stayed in my top 10 all year and it's never left. I loved it. I loved this film and I'm glad. I'm glad. Unfortunately, I would have liked to seen a little more love for it from the viewing public because I want to see more stories of either Furiosa and or Max. But whether that's going to happen or not, I don't know. And George Miller's getting a bit older now, so we'll see what the future is for the Mad Max franchise.
Yeah, it was one of those films that there was that whole raft of blockbusters in the first half of the year that all like bombed,
Yeah.
or just sort of underperformed, I think is the fairer way of saying.
Yeah, I don't know if
But
it
yeah, no,
bombed, but it underperformed.
yeah, I really liked it as well. I think for me, it's just a casualty of one of those films that, at halfway through the year, yes, it was in my top 10, but by the end of the year, it had just been sort of pushed out, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I thought it was great. I think realistically speaking, it's about as good a prequel to or follow up to Fury Road as you could hope for, really. I mean, that was kind of lightning in a bottle to some degree, but this feels very much of a piece with that. I mean, I thought Anya Taylor-Joy was great. I thought Chris Hemsworth was fantastic as the villain in that. I thought it's probably one of the best roles that he's had outside of Thor. He's had a pretty bumpy
Right.
ride outside of Thor, but I thought here he just really let loose. He really sort of obviously grew up on these kind of movies as a proud Australian,
Yeah.
and so he did not hold back, and and so Miller still had it in him to make one of these movies, or to quote the film, he had it in him to make it epic, I believe
Yeah.
is the quote.
But one,
So,
of,
yeah,
one of my one of my disclaimers is for most of the movies on this list. I've said to you before, 2024 has not been, in my view, the best year for movies. I've struggled over this year to add films into my top 10 because I've found I haven't been captivated this year as I have been in previous years, and I'm hoping 2025 is going to be better.
I think there's an element of truth to that. I mean, it's certainly interesting as we come into award season that there are no real front runners.
No.
We're recording this January the 18th, and you got sort of The Brutalist and Anora and Conclave and Amelia Perez, and a complete unknown seems to be gaining a bit of traction. But there is no juggernaut that everybody is collectively championing. No one's like, yes, that's the best film of the year. On the one hand, you can look at that and say, because there are so many great films. On the other hand, you can look at it and go, yeah, because there are lots of good movies and maybe not enough great ones. But
Yeah.
we'll get to one or two of those. I think shortly. So my number 4 is another movie I saw at Busan, and I'm not sure that you've seen it either. And it surprised me completely. It kind of came out of nowhere. It has since had some attention, and it's the Indian movie by Payal Kapadia, All We Imagine as Light. Now,
Oh, yeah. I haven't seen it, but I've wanted to.
yeah, it's picked up some sort of best international film love, and I think Sight and Sound named it as their the best movie of the year. It won't compete for the best foreign language film Oscar because India didn't put it forward. They put a different movie forward, which is baffling, but they always I think they tend to make their selections very politically. And that's a shame because I thought it was absolutely beautiful film. It won the Grand Prix at Cannes, so that's the second prize. And I didn't know much about it, and I was at Busan, and they have a lot of the Cannes winners at Busan, and so it's the first opportunity in Asia really to see a lot of those movies. And I remember there were two movies on that list that I had the opportunity to see, and I was like, I suppose I should. Neither of them sounded that interesting to me. But I was like, okay, bit of due diligence. Here's a good opportunity to see them in a timely manner on the big screen with a respectful festival audience. Let's do it now. And so one was The Seed of the Sacred Fig, which I thought was great, and it's in my top 10 as well. And the other was this one, All We Imagine As Light. And it was just a movie that just washed over me, and I came out and just thought, that was delightful. That was lovely. The director, Payal Kapadia, she has made only documentaries before now, and certainly in the first half of the film, it has a very sort of verite, grounded, realistic sensibility to it. It follows a couple of young women who have moved. They didn't know each other before, but they have moved to Mumbai for work, and they are both now working as nurses at a hospital. So you get this very kinetic sense of the city and the streets and working at a busy city hospital. It's not particularly grotesque, but it is just sort of chaotic and busy all the time. And then they're trying to live sort of individual private lives as well. Our main character, her husband, as soon as they got married, he pretty much moved to Germany for work, and so they never see each other. The younger of the two is slightly more sort of mischievous, and she's trying to start, or she has started in secret dating a Muslim boy, and so that has kind of issues. But these two women sort of share a modest apartment in Mumbai. And then in the second half, it really turns into something completely different, where they help an older woman who has been sort of evicted from her apartment move back to the countryside. And it takes on a far different tone, a far more sort of magical, realistic tone. It becomes a bit more sort of surreal and a bit more dreamlike. The score is really interesting. The choices of music are not typical of an Indian movie. There's kind of like jazz playing at some points and some far more sort of trippy guitar solo stuff. And it was really cool. And I just kind of came out of it and just thought, wow, that was really the kind of mid-festival palate cleanser that I kind of needed. It's just a breath of fresh air. It was absolutely beautiful, wonderful film. And it's really stayed with me. And I was just like, yep, love it.
Well, fantastic. Good. Moving on to, I think we're at number 3.
We are.
Number 3 is probably going to surprise you, but I so enjoyed this film, and I love watching the resurgence is the wrong word, the reimagining of Hugh Grant's career, and it's this Heretic.
Nice.
I think you're familiar with it, but essentially, 2 Mormon missionaries rock up at Hugh Grant's house to share the good news of Mormonism with him. And he essentially does a cerebral mind screw. I'm going to keep this fairly clean on these girls, but it's all mental anguish. Basically, questioning these girls, bringing them in, and you just see this concentric circle of weirdness closing in. Oh, sure, we really can't come in if there's only a male present. Oh, no, my wife's in the back. I mean, she's making blueberry pie, and then that's okay. And slowly you start to realize there is no wife, there's no blueberry pie. There's just this descent into mind games that just get crazier and crazier. And Hugh Grant as this creepy guy with an agenda. And the thing is, what makes this wonderful is you immediately think, there's going to be a sexual nature. Creepy old man, 2 young, pretty missionary girls. There's nothing sexual in this. It is purely cerebral. I mean, granted, later it gets physical and there's the final fighting going on to break free. But 3/4 of this film is just what choice you're going to make. And what's wonderful is at one point, like Hugh Grant starts spouting this religious, like countering their religious faith. And I'm even thinking, oh, that's nonsense. If I was there, I would come back at him with this, this, and this. And sure enough, the girl comes back at him with, no, my faith is this, this, this. And I'm like, you go, girl. And so Heretic was a film I really liked. Like I want to put this on my list. I don't have to think, does it go on my list? A lot of these films, if I'm honest, this year is like, is it in my top 10? I'm not sure. Maybe. This film, I loved it. I think it's gotten fairly well received. It's not, winning any awards, but I enjoyed it. And so I highly recommend it to anybody who hasn't seen it.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed it as well. Actually, as we speak, Hugh Grant has just picked up a BAFTA nomination, which is great for this.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, because horror movies don't tend to fare very well in sort of major awards categories, particularly performance-wise. So that's great to see. Be interesting to see if he can carry that over, because there seems to be one sort of one empty spot in the Oscar nominations that isn't really like locked in yet. So it'll be interesting to see who gets that. But I thought it was great as well. I really appreciate a movie that challenges you intellectually as well as your tolerance for sort of fear and intimidation like this. It is for the most part just a sort of a three-handed chamber piece where it's all about conversation, and it's all about, like you say, picking holes in their argument and in their belief system, and that's brilliant. We've all had, conversations down the pub about this kind of thing. We don't take it to the extremes that these characters do, hopefully. But I thought it was great. I mean, I think it's very representative of what I feel has been actually a really good year for horror movies. We've had movies like this, like Longlegs, like The First Omen, Immaculate, The Substance, of course, that have really, they're full on horror movies, but they have managed to actually sort of rise up out of the genre space to become sort of celebrated and well regarded on their own terms. And Heretic's right up there. I thought it was a lot of fun. Yeah, it gets a little bit wobbly in the third act, but I think by then it's sort of said everything that it wants to say, and it's great. I'm pleasantly surprised to see it as high up on your list as it is.
Yeah.
So that was your number 3?
3. Yeah.
Okay, so my number 3 is The Substance. So
it's my number 6. So we're talking about.
Oh, that's right. Yes, you've already mentioned it. Okay.
I was lower down. It's in my top 10.
Yeah, I mean, this movie was just absolutely fantastic. It really, really was. As soon as I heard about it, I was like, well, that's going to be in my wheelhouse. It's just a question of to what degree. And Coralie Farja is a filmmaker who was already on my radar. Her first movie, Revenge, is it's a sort of down and dirty revenge thriller, but with a very strong female protagonist, a very strong visual sensibility. And I was really interested to see what she did next. And this is just like the ultimate Hollywood satire, just with elements of, there is a Lynchian element to it.
Yes,
a lot of the stuff that it discusses is kind of grounded in reality. And once you watch Mulholland Drive, you'll see that, because that deals with Hollywood a lot. So some of that is folded in here. Essentially, obviously, it's a sort of Dorian Gray style story of
Faustian bargain.
Recapturing your youth, but it addresses all that Me Too stuff as well. And that's only going to work. And then it's Cronenbergian hot body horror. And it does not hold back on any of that. I've heard some people have kind of like complained that it's not very subtle, or that the story is a bit thin. And it's not supposed to be subtle, because the issue that is being addressed is not a particularly profound one. It's just an incredibly ever-present and frustrating one that needs to be readdressed again and again and again, and it's done in such a sort of fresh, such an invigorating, such a visually bold way. For a movie that is all about the objectification of beauty, this is a gorgeous movie about some of the most disgusting things possible. And Demi Moore is absolutely fantastic. Margaret Qualley is absolutely fantastic. even Dennis Quaid, who had to sort of step in at the last minute because it was originally Ray Liotta, and they'd actually shot a
Oh,
bunch of his scenes, and then he died. So they actually had to reshoot some of it
oh,
because,
that I did not know. I did not know
yeah,
that.
and
Could
just
Ray Liotta had eaten? Could he have eaten the shrimp as nastily as Dennis Quaid
well,
does in that
we will
film?
never know, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is a horrible way to eat shrimp, and just the sound design of this movie is just
Oh,
incredible.
yes.
So I
It-
mean, it draws on everything. You know, it's even coming hot on the heels of Barbie is kind of interesting because it talks about some of the same ideas as that movie, albeit in an incredibly
yeah.
different way. And it just reminds me of so many other movies. And it's great when I always love watching a movie and seeing the filmmaker show, not tell, all of their influences.
Yeah.
You know, and you just know that she saw and loved The Shining and Showgirls and Society, which is a great 80s kind of body horror movie with Billy Warlock in it. There's so many. I could go on forever, but everybody knows that the substance is out there and that it is fantastic. And yeah, it was my number one for a while, and then I just kind of like moved it around a little bit, you know, between. But my top
Yeah.
three are pretty interchangeable. I'll say that now as we get into the top three.
Sure, sure. Oh, I mean, I'll mirror everything you said. It was my number six. And if you want to know more, we have a whole review of this. So you can go to our review and hear everything that I have to say about this film. But I enjoy it so much. Like I said, I love the Faustian bargain. I love the highlighting of the objectification that we've placed on women, the celebration of youth culture, much to the we basically, as people get older, and specifically women, we sideline them for the new shiny new object, and how this movie just takes direct aim at that whole nonsense, and it's done in such a beautifully creative way. I think we said in our initial review, from the opening montage of the star on Hollywood
Mm.
Boulevard, we get a sense of where this film is going just from that opening scene with the star. And so, yeah, I think I'm glad it's on both of our top tens. Number two is The Seed of the Sacred Fig.
Okay.
I was just blown away by this film. And I've said before, I have a soft spot for anything that takes aim at authoritarian structures, whether in the West or the Middle East. And the very fact that this filmmaker had to smuggle out, I kept wondering, where did you film this? How did you film this? And I started looking it up and realizing he had to with nothing, walk over the border to get out of the country. I think he goes to Germany,
Mm.
and somebody had to smuggle the film out for him to edit. And so that alone has already you're on my good side. But this film, the way they look at this couple and this man who is a good man really highlights how our environment impacts the choices we make, who we declare as being a good or bad guy. I kept thinking, if I'm put in his role, what do I do? I have the luxury of living in a society that, by and large, that I have an openness to express my views to a degree, that I can make choices about my job. I can go somewhere else. I can do if something I don't like. There's so much more freedoms that I'm allowed. This man is in a structure that if I'm going to provide for my family, if I'm going to not disappear, I have to break my moral code. And watching the slow descent as he has to make compromise after compromise to the point where now I can no longer trust my family because my family's not on my side. The acting was like I don't know who these actors are, and the children who play the teenage daughters and the friend. This movie for me, it nearly made my top one.
Mm.
It's really close. Like you said, it's really interchangeable. And if you ask me tomorrow, it could be my favorite film of the year. So I would love to see some love this award season for this. And I think for the very nature of the history behind the film, people are going to be predisposed to give it accolades.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that it's actually It is up for Best International Film as Germany's entry because of the way that sort of funding and all of that kind of
Right.
thing works. So they're able to get it in that way, and so I think it stands a really good chance. So we'll have to see when the nominations come out next week. Yeah, I mean, just to echo everything you said, the performances are fantastic. The story is fantastic. Yeah, it's like a good man has to compromise in order to provide for his family, and then his family turns against him. And then you've got these brilliantly passionate, outspoken children. I love how there's so much tension involved in it, and it escalates to absurd levels. But then there's moments of humor, particularly towards the end, that he finds in the most ridiculous of circumstances. Yeah, not to repeat what you said, but I just thought I was blown away by it. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. I didn't really know what it was about. It was the other movie that I felt obliged to go and see.
Right.
And also what I love, I mean, it's great. Everything you said is great about what the filmmaker had to go through in order to make it, but that's not why the film is good. There are some films where you're like, oh,
Right.
I love this movie because of the
Right.
struggle to make it, but it's not that. The movie itself stands on its own and it's fantastic. Check it out.
Yeah, if anything, because it was so good, that's what forced me to read up on it because I wanted to know more about it. And then it became even more fascinating.
Okay. My number two, we have mentioned it already. This is The Brutalist.
Yeah,
So
I
this
think
is
I had it at number 5. So
okay, cool. So so this is Brady Corbet's sort of audacious, sort of old-fashioned, sprawling epic, this monument to sort of the chasing the American dream, the immigrant experience. It's so kind of sort of bold, and there's an
Yes.
arrogance to it that I think only a young man could make this movie. It reminds me of some of those Paul Thomas Anderson movies like There Will Be Blood or The Master. It's so reverential to the old Hollywood style story that no longer gets told, and yet it's about so many things that are so important today. Yes, it's 3.5 hours long. Yes, it has an intermission. It's shot 70 millimeter, this division, blah, 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 blah. But that's what it's about. I wrote something that I want to, if you forgive me quoting myself, but I want to sort of get it right. It's a colossal, imposing, near impossible artistic statement about a colossal, imposing, near impossible artistic statement. The movie is or reflects what it's about. It's about the pursuit of, and the artistic pursuit of creating something sort of ridiculously monumental, and it reflects that in the film itself. It's exactly this kind of sort of old school filmmaking that I am finding myself increasingly drawn towards the older I get.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and the way that I really appreciate the way that it's a young voice that needs to kind of tell this story, that would dare to tell something so imposing. And I was just like, oh yes, this is me.
Yeah.
I love it, and I can't wait to see it again and see it on the big screen and all that.
Yeah, a couple of things I'll highlight. One is Adrian Brody's performance. Spectacular. Like literally one of the best performances I've seen, not just this year, but in a long time. I thought it was just he has a way of invoking the character in such a passionate way. This is not a bad guy. This is not a good guy. This is a complex, nuanced immigrant who struggles with the insecurities, the ego. I mean, he both has a huge ego and a huge insecurity at the same time, as a lot of times immigrants coming from those kind of situations do. Another thing is, this is, like you said, 3.5 hours long, but it didn't feel 3.5 hours to me. Like, there's movies that are 2 hours long, and I'm looking at my watch going, when is this going to end? This film captivated me the whole time. I enjoyed it so much. For me, there was a metaphor, and I haven't really seen this expressed, but for me, as a person of faith, I just love they're building this Christian edifice with this cross, with this light. And so there's this beauty up here, but underneath it is just I was going to say swamp, but that would suggest everything's bad. There is a world underneath it that's creating this beauty that has some really bad stuff and really good stuff. There is love, there is lust, there is passion, there's infidelities, there's power projection going. There's all kinds of the human story going on down here. that is creating this beautiful thing up here. And for me, that was kind of the image that kept being reinforced into me while I was watching it, because there was parts of this film that I found disturbing. There was other parts that I found celebratory. I think I did read one person's reaction to it, and so I won't say it as my own, but it was almost like, depending on just like the edifice itself, depending on the angle that you're viewing it at, it has different. It can be either a little bit ugly or a little bit gorgeous, and that's why this film kind of comes across. I think the reason it doesn't figure as high up for me as it has for you is because there are some ugly aspects to it that didn't really resonate with me. But by and large, you talked about the big swing. This is a big swing.
Oh yeah.
And between that, Adrian Brody's performance, the grandeur and scope of it, it's definitely in my top 10, and I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah, and and it's also about addiction. It's also about sort of how the immigrants are exploited by the wealthy.
Yes.
But then there is a kind of sort of success story at the end of it, that he's able to make this monument that turns out, in the end, you discover in the end that it's a monument to his own wife and to their struggle, and it's representative of where they were held prisoner during the Holocaust, isn't it? And the building has this kind of other meaning that totally went over the heads of Guy Pearce's character,
who's brilliant, by the way. Guy Pearce was amazing in this film. I'd love to see him get a Best Supporting Actor for this.
Yeah, I think he will definitely get nominated. I did just want to ask you about The Brutalist, about the ending, because I think the ending has been quite divisive with some people. There's kind of like an epilogue which is set many, many years later,
right,
and it's kind of like a celebration of his body of work. And then the film ends with a really kind of light sort of disco pop song, which I really liked. I mean, I found it kind of momentarily jarring, but at the same time, I was like, oh, thank God. It sends you out after 3.5 hours with a real sort of spring in your step. And the song is called One for You, One for Me. And that's really what his whole motivation has been about. It's about, yes, I'm going to do this for you, but ultimately what I'm doing actually is I'm doing it for myself. And, it's that kind of reciprocal relationship. And so I thought, in the instant it happens, that ending, you're kind of like, oh, that's a strange way to end the movie after everything that it has been up to that point. But within a second, you're like, actually, that's kind of perfect. That's kind of just what I need. I needed it to end like that. Otherwise, I would have never been able to get out of my seat, I think.
Yeah. No, it's, I enjoyed it. I had no issues with it. The funny thing is, she gives the line at the end, the granddaughter, of, it's not about the journey, it's the destination, which is a play on a familiar comment now, where the destination, the journey is it's not the, yes, yeah.
It's the journey, not the destination.
Exactly. And yet this kind of flips it on its head. But when you think about what we've just watched for the last 3.5 hours, everything she just made sense, because so now we can celebrate. He's achieved all this, but believe me, the journey to get here was a lot of shit to push through. And there was a lot of, this movie is brutal. There's brutal aspects of this. I don't think we want to go into too many spoilers, because I think the film's fairly new. But, Guy Pearce he comes across as a patron of the arts, but this is a brutal, nasty man. And, yeah. So we'll just leave it at that.
Absolutely. Okay, so drum
Number
roll
one.
time. I mean, you haven't mentioned my number one yet, and I guess I haven't mentioned yours. So, Steve, what's your...
Is it Conclave?
It is not Conclave.
I didn't think it would be for you, but Conclave's my number one.
All right.
Yes.
All right.
My number one is Conclave. Yes. It has everything I love in a film. It's got religion. It's got politics. It's got Ralph Fiennes. It's got Stanley Tucci. It's got John Lithgow, just positioning themselves. I love everything about this film. I love the dialogues, the issues of people who genuinely want to do good in society. There's basically no bad guys in this film. John Lithgow is probably the closest to a bad guy, and then it kind of comes out he's not really that bad of a guy. These are very flawed humans who have taken upon themselves a very holy office. And how do you navigate this? How do you navigate imperfect people having to portray a certain level of perfection for the masses? And coming from my faith background, this just was my love language. I thought the ending was a little, I didn't mind it as much as I thought it a little bit outlandish. Suddenly, we went from a very grounded film to a very theoretical, in some ways, an absurd ending that could never have really happened in reality. But that's the way the filmmaker chose to go with it, and that's fine. But it's still my favorite film of the year.
I mean, I love so much about this movie. I thought the performances are great. It's a real sort of nail-biting tension throughout. I thought the attention to detail was great. The costumes, the set design, all of that. It's about humans being, handed a task that demands perfection. From your soul, very soul, and which is impossible. So it speaks in some ways to, the demands. It's kind of only sort of a minor part, but it's almost like you look at politics, any kind of election, or you look at sort of celebrity culture where there are demands put upon somebody that they must be perfect and infallible, and they cannot have any faults whatsoever if they are to, in the public eye, deserve their power, their status, and all the rest of it. And I just found that in the electoral race, for who's going to be, and the campaigning and the different motivations behind it, was all riveting, absolutely riveting. Like you, I had sort of the curveball is meant to be a curveball, and it kind of comes out of nowhere. I did go and look, and it's in the book as well, and this is sort of the front runner to win Best Adapted Screenplay this year. So I think you just have to say, well, that's just part of the story, and there is a precedent, and not to spoil what it is, but there is a precedent in history about that kind of thing, rumored to have happened in the past, or let's ruin it. There's Pope Joan famously. There are chronicled historical precedents for a woman masquerading as a man and actually becoming pope and things like that. I mean, this is not exactly that. It's something slightly different, but I think it's just the perfect kind of curveball to undercut the prejudicial element of the institution in a way that's a big kind of like middle finger. But it's like, but at the end of the day, does underscore that if this is the best person for the job and this is who the people want, then they should be allowed to do that.
See, at the end, I was still voting for Ray Fiennes. Ray Fiennes should have been Pope, but that's just my personal bias.
Sure, that's fine.
I loved it. So Conclave didn't make your top 10 at all?
No, I've got it kind of like 14th, but it's anything out of the top 10 is all just kind of like the same. It was pretty close. It was pretty close.
Yeah.
But no, it didn't. No, my number one, and I don't think it's that surprising. I've loved it since I saw it. Is Anora. I think it's absolutely,
yes, of course,
it's fantastic.
Of course,
Mikey Madsen just blew it out of the water. I thought she's absolutely sensational. I'm now horribly conflicted because she was always my vote for Best Actress. Now, because I just didn't think Demi Moore really stood a chance, and now you're seeing Demi Moore quite possibly does stand a chance. I'm still going to vote for Mikey Madsen. I have voted for her in the Critics' Choice things, which keep getting delayed now, but. Until I know for sure that she's out, I'm going to keep rooting for her. But if Demi Moore wins in the end, I'm absolutely thrilled. We have done a whole video about Anora, which is why I'm not getting into the weeds about that movie. I've said everything I wanted to say then, and I just love it. I love Sean Baker's movies, and I thought this was great. And it's wonderful to see it do as well as it has.
It's funny. I feel the same way about Anora as you feel about Conclave. I'd put it around number 14. It's too much yelling for me, but you can hear all about that in our review.
Excellent.
Well,
All right,
James,
there's our,
that's 2024. Yeah.
that is it. That's our top 10. How does that compare with your top 10? Let us know in the comments. Or you can hit us up on social media. I'm on Blue Sky at Marshy00, MARSHY00. Please let us know. Let us know your favorites and why ours are wrong.
Yeah. I'm on Blue Sky as well as Instagram under Stephen Hackman. Please look us up, and I would love to hear your comments in the comment box below.
Exactly.
James, I'm gonna go have some lunch now. I've been intermittent fasting. I'm starving.
That sounds like a great idea. All right, let's go do that. See you.
You're wonderful to see. You ought to be in pictures. Oh, what a hit you would be.